Stan Getz was an American jazz saxophonist. He's slightly unusual from the American jazz stable in that he wasn't black. He had a somewhat Jewish background, somewhat English, but did grow up in America, was born in America. His career spanned 1943 to 1991. In his early career, he played with some names that I've heard of: Jimmy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, Woody Herman. He played with lots of people, and then he became a name in his own right, as tends to happen for the people who appear on this list in the jazz thing. They become a band leader, and then they crank out very many albums. So this is true for him. He struggled with addictions through his life, and he lived in Sweden for a while.
Hi, my name's Dan, and I've got a mug of coffee and a mouse and a beard that I can stroke. And I'm going to give you a review of this album. So, it's an album of instrumental jazz. It's my first time listening to it. But it's somewhat unusual in some ways. We've had quite a few jazz albums on the channel so far as I work my way through this list. And this one doesn't sound like, I'm not really sure there's anything else that sounded quite like this. So it's got a string orchestra and a piano and a bass and drums and a tenor sax, which is Stan Getz. And it's been described as cool jazz, which I would kind of okay with that. It's been described as avant-garde jazz. I'm not sure I would claim that. I think it's not musically weird enough, really, to have that title appellation for it. I would maybe describe it as the third stream. So what you have to bear in mind is that I'm not a jazz expert. I'm picking some stuff up as we go along, but my idea of what third stream is that it's somehow some kind of blend between classical music and jazz, and this is that. Um, so it's a cross between, I would say, 1950s orchestral film music, and it was made in the early 60s. Especially, it sounds like Disney stuff from the kind of fairly early on in Disney's career, and jazz. And it's interestingly created because everything in it was scripted except for the saxophone. So it was written and arranged by a guy called Eddie Sauter. I hope I pronounced his surname right. Who I think really should have equal billing here, because he did the writing, he did the arrangement, and I don't know if he was involved in the production of the album as well. I'm sorry, I haven't got that to my fingertips. And it was written in such a way that it was left with gaps in which Stan could improvise. And as far as I understand, some of the tracks were recorded with him playing at the same time as the other musicians, and some of them were done with him overdubbing his work into it. I would say though that the result is actually quite nice. I found it to be quite engaging. The sax has a really nice tone. It sounds to me a bit like somebody who's singing, who has a slight smokiness to their voice, and is also smiling. And I'm not really sure how I can classify a sax sound as a smiling sound, but it feels like that to me. Excuse me. And there's some nice playing here as well. So, quite a while back now, I had a realization that when I got into jazz albums, what I tended to do was just do what I could on the technicalities and was avoiding too much in the way of quality judgments. And I think that was because I felt like I didn't really know very much about jazz, so I was going to try and find some stuff out, which I'm doing. I'm still nowhere near an expert. But I made a commitment a while back to say that when I do a jazz album, I'm actually going to talk about how it makes me feel, as well as any technicalities I've got about the music. How did this make me feel? I enjoyed it. It's an interesting album. It's good. Musical is the music is quite interesting. I'm somewhat convinced that I've heard one of these tracks once upon a time before. Uh, I don't know where, or maybe it's kind of the essential bit of the chords in the background that I that I've heard before. It feels like it should be in a Danny Elfman soundtrack for a Tim Burton film. In fact, a lot of it it's got that kind of Danny Elfman feel to it, I would say. So musically, I enjoyed it. Sax-wise, I enjoyed it. I would say it's not really very jazz. The only kind of element of jazz really is the sax playing with improvisation. Otherwise, it's kind of somewhat slightly off the wall, but interesting, filmy classical music, I would say. So that's what I think of this album. As always, at this point, I want to invite you to tell me what you think of this album. So please do share with me by leaving me a comment. And that's it from me for now.